It's already been 13 days, believe it or not, since the US elections, and we still, well, we know who the winner is. We are not sure if the winner is ever going to make it into, going to happen. Trump hasn't conceded yet, although there are hints that he's about to. Elections have been tarred by disinformation, protests, and extreme polarization. And as I said, things are not over yet. It's a long way to go to January 20th, and it's even more longer way to go after January 20th. We are here with Michal, Andrei, and Radu to discuss not only what has been happening in the US and learn more geography, as Ciprian put it, of the US, but also to discuss the impact of these elections, the results of these elections, what's going to come after January 20th in our region, in Europe, and actually worldwide. And I will start with Michal, and please do not forget to unmute your microphone. I will start with you, Michal. How are these elections seen from Poland? What has been going on so far, but also what is about to happen, if you know what's going to happen?
Thank you, Alina, and it's wonderful to be with good friends on Zoom, on the conference, as well with all of you on the other side of the screen. Let me just first push back a little bit on Alina's hesitation. I think it's really clear that it's going to be Joe Biden who takes over presidency of the United States on January 20th. And I know you are not saying that there is a question about it, but it's true that we are in this fog of some would say fake news that is bombarding us. But if we look at the recounts, if we look at the court cases, if we look at what's going on politically, it's clear that it's going to be Biden. And you asked, Alina, how it's being perceived in Poland, in my country. And the fact is that this fact that the next president of the United States will be Joe Biden is actually not widely accepted yet. And I think we will go into the details why, but part of it is this, frankly, rhetorics that President Trump has been producing. But the fact is that President Biden and his win, President-elect Biden, creates divisions within Europe. It would be the case under Trump as well. But there are some capitals that are very happy. Berlin is clearly rejoicing. Paris is quite content, though not on everything. And in Warsaw, there has been a bit of a hedging and a bit of a hesitation, partially because the first Trump term was so good for Poland, with boots on the ground, with political connections between Polish politicians and President Trump, and partially because there is a worry that Biden administration would be frankly more critical on key issues like human rights, freedom of the media, and that in some way it will make the pretty straightforward relationship more complicated.
So Michal, let me clarify this. When you're saying that there is hesitation, or there is not too much joy in Warsaw when it comes to Trump losing elections, you actually mean government. But what about the population?
Yeah, so the population is a little bit different story, but not entirely. There has been actually two polls that have shown that Poland is the only place where Trump would actually win with Biden by small margin. So, you know, I think we want to joke we are Trumpist through and through, but that's not the case. We are just quite polarized on this issue, and US election became domestic policy as well. And those who like Trump, like him for all the reasons I mentioned, and those that really detest him, really dislike what he stands for domestically, really dislike the style of politics, really that he has been representing, really dislike the populism or nationalism mix of this of those two that he created, which then spread throughout the world. So I think with a different government, and clearly we see it in different parts of the political spectrum, the results, the reaction to the results would be quite different. And right now, as I mentioned, is a bit of a hesitation at the political level.
Radu, let me turn to you and ask a similar question about Romania, because Michal has already been, mentioning polarization in our country, not only in the US, because of or due to the results of the elections. Do we see the same in Romania? What is the impact of the US elections in Romania, and what is the perception on a Biden administration?
I would say that, first of all, because of Romanian politics is less ideological, perhaps just as passionate as the Polish politics, but for sure less ideological and less assumed ideological than particularly for the party in power. I would say that for us, it's not necessarily an ideological loss. The current government and the current president in Bucharest cultivated Trump, but I think that any government in Bucharest and any president would have cultivated any president, because in fact our relationship is the bilateral relationship in between Romania and the US, no matter who comes to power in Washington and no matter who stays in power in Bucharest. So from this perspective, I would say it was less dramatical from an ideological perspective, but nonetheless, of course, any new administration means a certain sense of insecurity. Not necessarily doubts as regards, let's say, the strategic relationship, but as regards priorities, because at the end of the day, what are we talking about? Each administration has a certain set of priority. If I were to make, we are here at the summit dedicated to the future, but sometimes the past offers us quite some guidance as regards what the future might hold. From my perspective, looking at the twin economic and health crisis, which is affecting now the world, I would make a comparison with the previous economic crisis when the previous democratic administration came to power, namely Obama's first term. And I would say primarily the focus will be internal. It's normal, particularly if you're a new president and you're in healing mode, in uniting mode. You can't really unite the United States by necessarily pushing first and foremost a foreign affairs agenda. So I would say yes, foreign affairs remains a key component. The US is back in the game. Multilateralism is again a buzzword, I would say. So this is what the future holds, but how fast and how quickly and what kind of pivoting, that remains to be seen. Let us remember that it was the Obama who introduced the Asian pivot. Okay, Trump talked about enhanced great power competition. So nonetheless, I would say no matter what, Asia will still be important. Let's see also what will be the final numbers in Congress. Speaking of the role the Senate has, for example, in foreign affairs and defense, and that would be key in the relationship, and the plans that Biden might hold. But I would say focus on the inside, and yes, let's see who's the next Mrs. Newland from my perspective, because I'm not sure that the separation under this administration will be like under Obama administration, namely that we will see an Eurasian VP Harris in action, looking at the legacy, the history, the current inclinations. Let's see if the VP will not be more often in Asia rather than in Europe, and that perhaps we may see a first speech, even a video speech by Biden addressing the Europeans in a wider, let's say, call for the transatlantic alliance restoration. So that would be my comment on the Romanian side. Again, we are part of Europe. Yes, we're also part of NATO, and we have a special relationship with the US, but I'm mostly looking, let's say, at the effects that Biden may have on us Europeans and Romania as part of Europe.
Let me pick up on something that you said about, you reminded everybody that Obama did the pivot to Asia, but I do want to remind everybody that Trump was the one who actually withdrew US from TTIP. So yeah, we have to see where this is going. Andrei, I do want to ask you about the transatlantic relation, and how do you see it after January 20th, when Biden will eventually, hopefully, get into the White House? Is it going to be fixed the next day? Is it going to be better? Is it going to protect everybody within the transatlantic space and beyond? How is it going to develop?
Well, it depends. The transatlantic link has both practical issues that have to be addressed, and issues that have to do more with the atmospherics, with the dynamic in the middle of the Atlantic between the European partners, or most of the European partners, and Washington. So some of the things have been addressed as soon as Michal said, the results appear to be that the next administration is going to be a Biden-Harris administration, and thus some of the fog that for the past few years has consistently marked the relationship or complicated the dialogue is going to be or was lifted. But devil's in the details, and as I said, there are also practical elements, very important practical elements. And there the answer is neither in Washington nor in a specific capital in Europe, but I will single out two for obvious reasons, Paris and Berlin. First and foremost, just recently, the German Minister of Defense has confirmed something very important, that the 2021 German defense budget will still go up, despite COVID-19, despite the huge cost that throughout the world this means for state budgets, both in terms of income and in terms of extra cost to address both the healthcare and the economic fallout of the pandemic. Germany is still committed to contribute more to its own defense and thus contribute more to NATO. In that respect, moving the narrative from whether Germany pays enough to whether EU member states or European members of NATO contribute enough in terms of their own defense and thus the shared defense within the alliance will be very significant in the tone of the transatlantic relations. And one final element regarding Paris, one of the things that is very clear about President-elect Biden's agenda is that climate and climate-related issues are of paramount importance, for economic reasons, for domestic reasons, but also for global, if you want, power projection reasons. The US under President-elect Biden and Vice President Harris strives to be, and that's what you, based on at least their policy proposals, as much as we can get a glimpse of them from the campaign, is very ambitious in this field. And the statement that the first executive action that the new president's going to do in office is rejoin the Paris climate agreement is very significant and will provide. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve the problems that we have in transatlantic relations in terms of the structural differences that exist even between allies, but will address a very significant body of economic, political, and, if you want, diplomatic issues that may provide a new dynamic in other areas as well.
Andrei, you mentioned, climate change and the policies on climate as being something that could actually strengthen the transatlantic link. How about Russia? And this is a question, first of all, to Michal, but then to everybody else. How about Russia? Is Russia an issue which is going to further tension the transatlantic relation? Is it something that's going to put things back together? And what is the Biden approach to Russia going to be? Some fear a new reset, as under Clinton Secretary of State. What is the Polish take on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, we'll see exactly what the new policy will be. Right now, we can go by what the mood is in the Democratic Party, what President-elect Biden has been saying, and also what his policy advisors like Mike Carpenter's have been saying. So pretty consistently, what we have heard from Biden's campaign was that they will approach Russia from a position of strength, that they will try to push back on Russia's revanchist policies in Ukraine in particular, but also in Central Asia, and certainly when it comes to Belarus. And Biden himself has been outspoken on this much more than the current president of the United States, Donald Trump. On the other hand, and maybe one more thing, the mood in the Democratic Party is also very Russia skeptic because of Russia's interference in US presidential election, especially in 2016. There is really, and Republicans are traditionally more skeptical, and that skepticism continues. So there is a large degree of consensus in Washington when it comes to skepticism toward Russia. That said, of course, every previous US president has tried to have a reset with Russia. I don't think we'll see a reset, but there is a bit of a debate. And for those who really have been watching this, there has been a debate back and forth within Washington on whether there should be some kind of new opening, new rethink of the policy toward Russia. So we'll see. There is a worry here. People are making case that whatever the policy would be, Central and Eastern Europe and Europe has to be consulted. There is a question of how Biden's administration is going to act when it toward Nord Stream 2. There is a question about how what would be exactly the outcome of the START negotiation. So there are a number of issues that will have to fall into place pretty quickly. I'm optimistic in a way that I don't think that President-elect Biden will look into the eyes of Putin and will see his deep soul. I think that they're going to be much more realistic, but I hope that they will in fact reach out to Europeans, including our region, to deeply consult before making up their policy toward Russia.
Andrei, the same question to you, but with a transatlantic twist this time. So do you think Russia is going to be a thorn in the transatlantic relation, or is this something that's going to do it even better?
Look, Russia has constantly created a number of issues and perpetuated a behavior particularly related to the Baltics, the Black Sea, but it covers also Mediterranean, whether Eastern Mediterranean or Libya, taking stances or assuming positions that were not considered necessarily aligned, and in many cases were considered as going counter to the interest of both the policy proposed by Washington or by the allies in general. Its policies have constantly riled, unnerved, in some cases even worried policymakers, both in the region, so on NATO's flank, but also in many of the Western capitals or in DC. There were critical voices both in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party. The Trump administration had its voices that were critically and clearly critical of Russia's stances with regards to such issues. And ultimately, if you look at the past 4 years of the Trump administration, despite all the fog that I've mentioned earlier and the noises around the transatlantic link, what we used to call the transactional nature of the presidential discourse, etc., ultimately the transatlantic link yet again proved its value, proved its ability to address some of the challenges despite differences between various capitals. Now, would this be the case with another 4 years of more of the same policies? I'm not going to speculate on that, but what I can say is that we do have an opportunity now to change the dynamic. And in that respect, I think the Europeans understand, and I'm generalizing here, but do understand, not just Poland and Romania, but Europeans in general, understand that their role in providing for their own security and defense, not just in military terms, energy security, trade with the neighboring region, supporting democratic processes and the stability of regions around Europe, whether the Black Sea region or the Balkans or Eastern Mediterranean or Sub-Saharan Africa, remains critical for the transatlantic link and for their own security. And thus, there is enough substance in this new context to reimagine a transatlantic link that is, again, despite differences that will persist with the new administration and concepts that are not clarified enough, like strategic autonomy or ideas that are floated around Europe that have their own value in the international dialogue, but are not clear enough to not generate their own sort of noise in the transatlantic dialogue that is sometimes going counter the shared interest for clarity. But that being said, I think we really are in a moment where the transatlantic relationship may go even beyond strictly defense and security elements and redefine the way the West functions, the same way that we worried 4 years ago that the West no longer is capable of speaking on one voice.
Let me pick up on this and go to Radu, because Radu, you also mentioned China, and you Andrei mentioned, you know, taking the transatlantic relation beyond security and how about China, Radu? Is China going to be of high importance to the Biden administration, to a new administration? And if once we are at this question, there is just yesterday it has been announced a new trade agreement between 15 countries in Asia, the biggest trade agreement in the world. And as I mentioned earlier, US has just withdrawn from TTIP to the Trump administration. So A, is China going to be high on the US agenda? B, will TTIP come back to life? Meaning, you know, whatever that means, will the US join the new agreement? How are things going to develop there?
I think it's a strategic dilemma for the new administration because, again, you can send a lot of kisses in the air, in the different continental directions based on former friendships and alliances. But at the end of the day, you got to have priorities. Whether we like it or not, international politics is also about attention management and also about ego management. A lot of the parts of the world want American attention and American partnership and American focus. And I would say that from this perspective, even us Eastern Europeans, if you remember again, the first Obama turn, we were a bit upset back then. They were including a letter from previous presidents that, hey, don't forget about Eastern Europe and don't forget about Europe as a whole. I would say that for the moment, again, the focus will be internally. From the external focus and from the external attention, I would say that my sense of, in all modesty, foresight as regards Biden and great power competition is that great power competition is here to stay. It may be done more the French way. What do I mean by the French way? Perhaps an iron hand, let's say with a glove, with a smoother glove. And I think this is more typical of the Democrats. I think this is one of the things that China may fear, namely that a kinder, nicer U.S. administration will gather allies around the table in terms of great power competition. In the meantime, again, what we have witnessed this week, and this is pretty ironic, Trump administration comes into office, drops TTIP, drops TPP, and now this administration, in its finishing line, witnesses RCEP. Okay, a regional economic partnership and cooperation without India, because I think this is one of the big strategic victories for the US. Helping Indians realize that their national interest is not necessarily until they're prepared to join this trade agreement to be inside, because they're less competitive than the Chinese. But nonetheless, just looking at numbers, this area can't be ignored. So now you can do quickly a regional counterpart. You can go for that TPP, Asian TPP, or you can ask the Japanese ally for a quick entry into, let's say, the updated version of this TPP, or you can go for TTIP. I think they can be done in the same time. What I see different in Europe is here a tiny switch in between the French and the Germans. If you're looking at the messages coming from the CDU and the German messages from Brussels, I would say it's more than an open hand. It's almost a brotherly hug or a sisterly hug. If I would be looking at the French position, I would say it's mostly like, okay, I'm happy to see you, but nonetheless, we're moving on, we're carrying on with our strategic autonomy. So I think that even Europe is still waiting in a way for the US administration to make a serious renewal of vows. If we manage to see such a serious renewal of vows, I think that a lot of things can be achieved together, and then China will be on the defensive despite its 15 years plans.
Michal, we probably want to address the China question as well, but also let's move on to Congress, because you know, it is a presidential country, but however, Biden has to rule together with the Congress. He's not really alone in what he's doing. So how do you see the relation going further between, you know, the Congress and Biden? Is Biden going to have a very supportive Congress? What is the Senate going to look like? How difficult will it be for him to push things to the Congress, or is it just going to be a bromance all along? And then the Congress, whatever policies are being decided there, Congress has to approve them as well. So how do you see this in the next 4 years?
Well, all eyes on Georgia, of course, where there is going to be one more sort of race that will require a repeat, where 2 Senate seats will be decided. Right now, Republicans have 50 seats in Senate. Democrats have 48. If Democrats were to gain those 2 with a split 50-50, Vice President Kamala Harris would have the deciding vote. Though that's not the most probable scenario, because in the past, at least historically, Republicans have been able to get a better turnout in this sort of elections done at unusual times. If we have a Republican-controlled Senate, House of Representatives controlled by Democrats, but with a smaller margins, and a presidency controlled by Democrats, by Biden, I actually expect pretty much quite a bit of gridlock. I think what we are seeing right now over the last 13 days, as you said, is a preparation for really a deep fight. I don't think the mood is, despite of what Biden has been saying, I'm not sure if the mood is really set for healing. I think we are, the Americans are living increasingly in a separate information bubbles. We'll still have Donald Trump doing something, right? I mean, he's not going to go poof on January 21st. So whether this is Trump TV or some kind of split within the Republican Party, you know, that's not going to be the unifying force. So I think it's going to be very hard, particularly on domestic politics and domestic policies, which, you know, given that we are here, I mean, one of the, I think, I don't remember if it was Rado or Andrei mentioned how inward focus US is going to be. I think that's clearly going to be the case, especially with the economic problems and the pandemic. On the other hand, Biden might have actually much more way of much more influence in foreign policy, because US is likely to be gridlocked for you know, some time to come. So that would be my quick take. And on China, let's come back in a second round, because I fully agree that this is going to be the key topic for transatlantic cooperation. I mean, if we get China to get it right, we'll have a way forward for transatlantic agenda. If we don't, the other issues will be really marginal. But I'll stop here.
Okay. I do want to pick up on something that you said and then move on to Andrei, because you're saying that how Americans are living in different informational bubbles, and how the polarization is exploding, is going to the extreme, if you want to put it this way. But at the same time, with Donald Trump not in office, yeah, he's not going to go poof, but he's not going to be in office. Many say that this is the end of populism, both in the States and in Europe, throughout Europe. Andrei, would you agree with this?
Unfortunately, no. I think populism is here to stay, and it's here to stay for a while. Now, indeed, the success of the incoming American administration will play a role in this. It may play a sea change role, and indeed represent, if you want, a first shot that, if you want, conventional democracy has as a vaccine against nationalist populism. Unfortunately, this is a very, very potent disease, and it's been there for ages. I don't think the circumstances, whether the economic or the social or the demographic circumstances, are in favor of thinking that one election means that democracy prevails, and this sort of nationalist populism will just go poof. However, there is an interesting demographic element in the election, the one that, for example, turned a convincingly Republican state like Georgia blue, and that does give a hint, a possible hint to how the replay of the elections in Georgia will play out in January. But then again, I think it's a little bit more complex, and we're gonna see this both in Europe and in the US still playing a role. However, there is an important element there that I can add to what Michal was saying earlier regarding the interplay between Congress and the administration's agenda. There are some areas where, almost regardless of the majority, the president and his team is going to have a hard time. TPA, to get a trade promotion authority and be able to negotiate quickly a trade deal with Europe is not impossible, but it's going to be very, very difficult, because in the president's own camp, there are very important voices and factions of the party, essential factions of the party, that don't see globalization as it took place in the last 30 years, this neoliberal approach to globalization, including trade deals, as being a winning card for nations. And thus, they do see it critically, not necessarily against multilateralism. These are voices that are strongly supporting multilateralism, but they're not very keen on free trade as it was developed until now. So Michal is right in thinking that the relationship to China will probably offer also an opportunity to redefine trade deals in a way that's not necessarily a complete opening of local markets, a complete, reset in the model, but one that takes into consideration local industrial chains, relocalization of certain industries, labor and environment, a lot more than just expansion of a set of rules, of trade rules, and foreign direct investment protection. And there, indeed, we have a huge opportunity to work together in our redefined relationship with China.
Radu, I do have a question about, well, it's not about the UK, but it does involve the UK. Is Europe, is EU enough for US without the UK? How is the relation with the UK going to, and US going to develop? And is it going to shadow the relation with the EU?
Well, what can I say? One of the five eyes is still winking at the other four. And the US is, the UK are part of this trusted network. So I would say that I never personally underestimate the British and particularly countries with an imperial history, because they have strategic thinking despite of momentary setbacks. So from this perspective, I would say that COVID-19 is offering a good excuse, including for the government in London, to blame it on COVID, and not necessarily on Brexit in terms of certain economic fallouts. That being said, I think we are already seeing, and perhaps Poland is a better example than Romania, a set of bilateral enhanced partnerships in the making in between London and other key capitals in Europe, whether we're talking about strictly bilateral issues or more widely regional issues, including Ukraine, Western Balkans, and so on. I have a feeling that, like one of the famous proverbs says, in order to stay on, I have to pretend to leave, or I need to be seen as leaving. So from this perspective, I think that the UK will still remain a cherished security partner for the UK, including in wider Europe, not necessarily within the EU, but for sure in the Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership. It will be interesting how the UK will be maybe acting as a possible bridge in the future, a pragmatic bridge between Turkey and the US. I think we should not underestimate this connection in the future, particularly a certain delay in Ankara in congratulating Mr. Biden. We could all see the enthusiasm in the making from a distance, from the other part of the Black Sea. But leaving that aside, I would say that I think in the next 6 months, a lot of the capitals will be finalizing two analyses. One linked to health and economic consequences of COVID-19, and one linked to preferred, speaking of foresight, strategy, and the way forward, a finish of a certain reassessment report in terms of alliances and options. And I think that almost all serious capitals around the world are realizing that the world is changing, but we can't spend 5 years in analyzing how the world is changing. So a series of key stakeholders, including in Washington, London, Bucharest, Paris, Stockholm, Poland, just to mention the Euro-Atlantic flank, will essentially make some very frank analysis and say like, okay, perhaps I may like this or not about this capital, about this club, but for the moment, it's my only option. Or, okay, with Trump, it was okay in a certain negotiation as regards China for me to try to get more from China from a business slang, but not to be so vocal on Beijing like Washington. But now with Biden, it may be different. Speaking of famous books, like This Time is Really Different. So let's see how much energy is being consumed again by the internal level, no matter how much a president or a prime minister across our common value space in the West. It means well, as regards partners, we are still driven or consumed, by our internal agenda. Think of Macron, for example, as the best example from this perspective. So much ambition, but so many problems at home.
You mentioned that the world is changing, and that brings me to another question to Michal, which is also connected to China. So I give you a chance to follow up on what you were trying to say about China. So the world is changing, and China offers this new ideology, this new approach to government, which is a free market, but not a free population, not enough human rights, to put it this way. Is this something that is really going to be adopted by other countries as well? Is this an offer that other governments are going to seriously consider? Is this new ideology, it's not new, but it's much more vocal, going to affect the role that China is going to play internationally?
Thank you, Alina. It's an excellent question. I think so far we don't have evidence that China is particularly successful in creating a really deep level of alliances and in a way that have this ideological component to it, in a way that US has been, where you were in alliance with the US, both because of your common interests, but also because of your common values and your approach to the government. It's certainly not successful in Europe, even though there are transactional relationships between China and European countries. I think here probably the best example would be Hungary. There are other places that US and China clearly compete over, and frankly, I would say that most of our neighbors in Central and Eastern Europe are in this group, and my own country is one that, because of close relationship with the US, have firmly chose. But it is, but it is a very long-term competition, and perhaps, the places where you can see maybe elements of it, like maybe like Philippines, some other ones that have switched alliances based on both transactional aspect of it and to some extent seeing the development model and political model that China offers as an incentive as well. And in that sense, West will have to compete in that space as well. So it's a competition on power, it's a competition on ideology, and of course the competition will also span aspects of technology and economy, which is it's very pronounced already.
Andrei, before picking up on any of the issues which were left unanswered, I do have a question for you, and it's going to be the same for everybody. On a scale from 0 to 10, or in terms of percentage, how different, when it comes to the substance of it, to the policies of it, how different is the Biden administration going to be from Trump administration? 100%, 1%, where?
I'm afraid I don't have a number, and I think there is no preset number. Well, I don't think there is a preset number. It will very much depend on the sort of relationship it develops with Congress and what sort of appointment we'll see in the cabinet. So what kind of voices will drive foreign policy, trade, etc. Second, I think we're going to see a lot more continuity, partly because the United States is akin a huge tanker. No energy connections here. I'm just saying that it behaves like a huge ship. It can't change course very abruptly, and if it does so on its own peril. Then we're going to see the same way that we saw a lot of continuity in the Trump administration, because some of these things are structural. They don't change fundamentally. Radu said earlier that imperial powers think strategically, but so do nuclear power. And the US, it's the ultimate, if you want, strategic thinker, even when sometimes execution of strategy is sloppy or disregards certain regional or externalities that may, as was the case with the famous Obama pivot to Asia statement and thus policy and its deployment. But then again, the new administration will have to follow those fault lines to still address the same issues, the same structural elements of the international.
So it's not going to be 100% different. It's not going to be a flip-flop.
No, but it may be very different if you get a very ambitious foreign policy agenda, which we don't know yet for sure, or it may be very, very ambitious if conditions kind of force it to react. I think we're going to see, first and foremost, a very professional administration from the get-go in terms of actual cooperation between the political level and the administration, including at the level of State Department. There is actually an expectation in the rank and file of the main institutions, whether it's security set of institutions in the US or State Department, that really look forward to a more organic relationship. Now, having said that, we know from both the Obama administration and the Clinton administration that having an administration that has high regard for professionalism doesn't necessarily mean there's no infighting or a competition that may actually hinder the smooth working of cooperation between various departments.
Let me see what Radu has to say. How different is the Biden administration going to be from a Trump administration in the policies of it? Can you give us a number?
It's really hard to assess. I would say that I would venture and say that more than half will stay the same, although perhaps reframed. I agree with Andrei that it's really hard to move a big ship because it's also a matter of credibility. So, for example, I think changes will be style initially, not substance. First of all, again, let's see what happens in the Senate as well. Of course, you still have executive powers and executive acts, measures, but nonetheless, and I would say the Senate matters. And from this perspective, the coincidence between the Senate majority and the president will also matter in terms of putting substance into part of the negotiations outside. I say more than half. Why? Because even for a gentler administration in terms of style, which the Democrats for sure will be, it doesn't mean that I think that one of the lessons from the previous time, which Biden may not want to repeat, is any sign of perceived weakness. Because it's one thing if you're looking very gentlemanish, very ladyish, and it's another thing if people have the feeling that they can push around the still existing hegemon. So I would say that what the Democratic administration can't, what the Democrat administration can't afford, is to change course too quickly and on too many strategic stuff. Again, great power competition is here to stay. The means, the style will be different, more focused again on coalitions. Why should I, bash China alone? Let's do a club, and including, and let's do some creative thinking about any possible containment, for example. But leaving that aside, and of course having the quid pro quo in the sense that you help me with China, I help you with Russia, and so on. Perhaps I would say that. Again, I stress the term reframing. I'll give you an example. Clean networks. What happened, for example, in the 5G is an expression also of tech competition, but also more widely of great power competition, right? Do I drop perceived success by the Trump administration, or perhaps I may drop the idea of clean networks? Perhaps the style may be different, but for example, do I come as a Democrat administration and say, like, forget about any memorandum signed or forget about other issues? It may bring a level of instability in between administrations where I think the Democrats historically like to position themselves as the rebuilders of credibility. Let us not remember that periodically the Republicans drop agreements signed by the Democrats, and it's not the Democrats dropping agreements done by the Republicans.
Half of the policies are not going to change, while the style, which is very important in politics as well, is going to change. Michal, can you give us a number?
I wanted to give you this 51%, but then the more I've been thinking about it, look, couple observations. No, I think it's more like 25-30%, to be honest, but it's a serious one. I mean, first of all, to some extent, even Donald Trump was a continuation, right? It was not an entire break, but his tactics and his style made it such a different experience, to say the least. And I think in this, so here is this, what Rado mentioned, framing, but I would put it a little bit differently. I mean, there are a couple of things we have at least good sense of where Biden is going to be different. I think that one big principal difference is going to be a different use and relationship with traditional allies, both in Europe and in Asia. So very different approach to alliances, not transactional, not interest-based only. Secondly, you will have an introduction back of values and democracy. That's at least very clearly coming out from Biden's administration, and this will play a role as well. Thirdly, maybe countering to all this, 4 years, both of Donald Trump and frankly of the last year of dealing with the pandemic is leaving US weakened. I mean, we are not yet out of the woods with the pandemic. If you compare how China is operating right now to what's going on domestically in the US, you have the differentiation in power has really sped up very quickly over the last year. So even though, you know, I think the big strategic goals of competition with China, of maintaining a rule-based international system will be similar, the tactics will make this 30% difference enough that it could over time really deliver very different results, you know, within 1 or 2 terms of the next president. So I guess my number is exactly 32 and a half.
Okay, thank you. Let's try and get and come a little bit closer to home, Andrei. Is the new Biden is the Biden administration going to have a different interest and a different impact in the region, in our region, in Eastern Europe?
I think it won't. There's one important element. One advantage of having a president that has spent 8 years in the White House is that some of these issues are familiar. The same way that US politics and transatlantic relations have a number of preset elements, the same way our region, Central and Eastern Europe or the Balkans or the Black Sea come preloaded. The deck of cards is relatively clear, even when you have sometimes positive, sometimes negative things tipping the scale, as was the election yesterday in the Republic of Moldova, that changes a particular dynamic. I think overall reform and relations with the capitals in the region that are not members of NATO and the EU with Washington will improve. There's going to be also more alignment between Washington and the EU and NATO countries with regards to these areas. So we see more synchronicity here. But ultimately, beyond the professionalism, beyond it's the nature of those interests that doesn't change. So no, I don't expect suddenly the US to change tack. And I would say that this falls under what Radu and Michal said. There are continuity elements. There are, however, elements that will be different. And particular governments, in the sense, in a political sense of the term, particular leaders will find it way harder to get the attention they seek, and they need domestically as a validation in Washington. I'm not going to name names, but I think they're fairly evident. And that's going to change the dynamic in between these countries and their partners in the EU and NATO. Again, the relationship is not going to move from 100% transactional to 100% values-based or principled. Here, there's a mix of values and interests that is at play, and we'll see, again, continuity. It is important that as we speak, a 7-country visit of Secretary Pompeo takes place, starting not by accident in France. And I go back to your original question, relationship with Russia, which will impact the way the US and some of the regions that are of interest in Bucharest will develop in terms of relationship between the transatlantic European partners and the US. We're going to have to see very quickly strategic negotiation on nuclear weapons. So there's going to be a renewed dialogue on a number of issues that, while not directly impacting regional politics, because they take place at a very high strategic element, some trade-offs may be part of those deals.
I do want to challenge all three of you because, and rightly so, you said that there is going to be continuity, at least some, or maybe a lot, with the previous administration, with Trump administration. But continuity also means isolation in a way, because US is going to be consumed with its own internal problems, political and economic, and it's not going to be able to refill the vacuum that it left when it withdrew from certain regions. So for different reasons, we are still going to see a US which is not involved, which is somewhat isolated, and it's not going to be the hegemon that, as Andrei, I think, mentioned, some people would want to see. Radu, is that correct?
It's energy management 101. Again, it's something, let us not forget also that the Democrats are very much in tune with the global agenda and are getting feedback in real time, not only from social networks, but also, speaking of multilateralism, from the network of alliances. So let's say if something becomes complicated enough, scary enough, you know, including in terms of world order, or let's say a conflict becomes open enough, a wound is strong enough to influence hearts and minds globally, the Democrats will be there to the rescue, whether they like it or not, because they're a new administration who is also prone to give a new hope as regards the U.S. comeback, you know, restoring letters. I looked at the website of the transitional team, restoring American leadership, right? Speaking of make America great again, but then restoring American leadership. Well, restoring American leadership means that in case a crisis pops up at 2 a.m., the White House has to take the call. It does not necessarily mean putting boots on the ground, you know, but it also means, again, referring to mistakes from previous administration, not defining a red line that you can't subsequently enforce. And here I mean Syria, because this is an issue of credibility subsequently, and it you know, once other, speaking of great power competition, once other great powers or medium to great powers or aspiring great powers, you know, get a sense of a wounded hegemon, then things may be becoming worse. So I trust their instincts. They may not be able to do all of the things they want to do as quickly, but I'm sure they will be saying the right things and they will be there. I'm not sure that, again, being there first on Twitter and saying the right thing will matter, you know, or a press release or something, but nonetheless, it signals US interest. It's not by chance that we see a pretty busy Russia in trying to, until the 20th of January, you know, to use this transition period to wrap up a series of regional issues, including peacemaking in the Caucasus.
I do have a question for the three of you, and then please also make any closing comments, arguments you'd like to make. We only have a few minutes left. I'm not going to ask for numbers again, although I'm very tempted, but I won't. But how important is Trump going to be in American politics and for Biden in the next 4 years? Michal.
Oh, this is a fantastic question. I look forward to learning the answer from the reality. I suspect the reality. Alina, the answer is 3, of course, to your number question. No, it's a silly joke. There are a couple things that I think we know. The way that Republicans are now acting in this moment shows that they are basically pandering to the Trump voter, which means that unless President Trump has a personality transplant, he will remain a very important voice in the Republican Party. Now, what is he going to do with this is really fascinating. I was chatting with some colleagues and we were talking about possibility with pure speculation too, right? I mean, if somebody has information, that would be very good. But when we were speculating, one of the speculations that seems not implausible is some kind of Trump TV. He's getting more fighting with Fox News. He's clearly very fond of real TV. So if you add Trump to Trump TV, you get a bit of a Berlusconi model. And I like this. I mean, it's Berlusconization of Trump is something that not particularly good for America, but certainly would leave Donald Trump as an important voice and really power on the right side of the political spectrum, leaves all kinds of possibilities for 2024, even if it's not him, it's someone who is blessed by him. So my God's sort of speculative thinking is that he's not going away in a way of really driving, especially the Republican Party.
Andrei?
Well, there's over 70 million voters in the US that have voted for Donald Trump. So Trump may be the departing president, and that may be the formal end of Trumpianism per se. I find it hard to see somebody with the same characteristics running or even winning the White House. But that being said, there's a lot of room for the same particular messages that have provided appeal to a very diverse demographic. There's no unity. The same way that the Democratic Party and the Biden campaign had to build a very, very comprehensive and complex coalition of voters in order to succeed in these historical elections in that respect. So did Trump, with minimal instruments, with a parsimony of tools that spoke to this public. And this is a lesson way beyond America, because you've asked about populism and you've asked about nationalist populism. I think we'll see more of that still defining elections and electoral results. But personally, there wasn't a second President Jackson very soon. There were others that had those characteristics, but I think this is a closed chapter in that sense.
Radu, also 2 minutes.
Okay, I love what Michal said on the Godfather, and of course, Andrei, you know very well, we resonate from a lot of perspectives. I would just say that considering the fact that he doesn't have his own media set, and Mr. Murdoch turned Fox News last minute, he may use that Save America super PAC that he's funding for the moment, to be starting for 2024 a Godfather 4.
Okay, well, that's very encouraging. So we have the Berlusconization, we have Godfather 4, we have populism is here to stay. On this very realistic note, I want to thank you, the three of you, for this conversation, and I want to thank all of our viewers, and of course to Ciprian, who's been gracious enough to invite us all for this.
And thank you, Alina.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It was very good fun.
Don't leave. Wait. So thank you as well to our four speakers. And just before we leave, if I can see all of them, I mean, Alina has asked all of you such interesting questions. So I will give you the opportunity to return the favor. Each of you has half a minute to ask Alina one question. Go, Radu.
That's not part of the deal, though.
I didn't say answers as well. Radu, go.
Would you welcome Biden in Q1 at the GMF event in Bucharest?
Okay, of course. Okay, Andrei?
Well, I was thinking about the GMF event, but not in Bucharest. I was thinking about how, what do you think the top transatlantic item on agenda is going to be in Brussels Forum 2021?
Cool. Michal, sorry.
Alina, give me the exact number. No. Exactly the number 3. I'm curious to if I'm serious, and I'll be serious for a second. I mean, if your take on Biden's real chance for renewing democracy agenda and having US be again a leader, especially in our part of the world. And you don't have to give exact percentage hands, but your take on this.
China, populism, and economic recovery after COVID-19, I would guess, would be the first three issues on the Brussels Forum agenda. But Michal might contradict me if I'm wrong. I don't think 4 years are enough for Biden to recover the democracy agenda, neither worldwide. And I do like the idea of inviting QAnon to a Bucharest event.
Of course, we all know that events in cities are of the past, and we do live in virtual events in 2021, most likely.
That's what everybody meant, virtually.
Yeah, virtually, yeah. I would like to thank all of you, and I think the conclusion of where and how much is Biden admin similar or not to the Trump administration might also be reflected in the type of vice president that this presidency has. 2024, why not Kamala versus Ivanka? So, you know, let's not just erase that from our memory. And I think it's similar to what Radu and Andrei have. One, Radu is in a room full of light, and Andrei is in a room full of, well, the evening has set upon us to some extent. So I think, yes, it's in between as well. Thank you very much for taking the time.